Small businesses are going through it. It's not easy in this day and age to be an entrepreneur.
With AI, anybody can make a good resume.
That's true.
Right. Do a deep dive. Let's find out. What is that employee saying about their previous employer?
A lot of owners don't have the time for it. I'm like, that's what you need HR for. Sure, I may make the wrong hire, but I'll just go ahead and fire them and it'll be okay.
Did you really fire me because you don't like that I wear a blue shirt every day? Or is it because you don't like my religion? Because
I couldn't agree with you more. Training is key.
yes, they might take time, but to develop. But that's also where HR for Your Small Biz comes in. They often will couple that claim with a claim of being an employee so that they can fall under our discrimination laws. So,
like $60,000 missing out of their account. Come to find out, workers' comp hit them.
that's the
and
workers'
said-
comp. Yeah, I knew you were
said,
going there.
Hold up. What are some of the landmines that are there that, they may not even realize they're stepping into?
They don't get demoted.
Say that one more time, because I can't tell you how many times I have had a leader say, I'm just going to move that person. Can you say it one more time? Why they should, what they should not do, and why they should. Hi, this is Krishna Powell with HR for Your Small Biz. And so for quite some time, I was telling you all that I was going to start having more guests. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce Susan. I'm going to let Susan tell you who she is, but if you ask me, she is the employment lawyer of lawyers. Mwah. When I tell you I love Susan, I love Susan. Not only does she do incredible work, but she's also an incredible person. So Susan, tell them who you are.
Oh, thank you, Krishna. That is the nicest introduction I think I've ever had. And I'm going to take you everywhere with me now. You could just do my PR. So for those of you who we haven't met yet, my name is Susan Sponsky, and I'm an employment law attorney with Hill Wallach. And Hill Wallach is an 85 attorney law firm. We're home based in Princeton, but we're located throughout New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Florida, California, and Illinois. So you name the area of law, we practice it. But for me, as Krishna said, my specialty is employment law, which I really enjoy and feel very passionate about, both employer and employee rights.
Excellent. Thank you so very much for gracing us with your presence. Well, I asked you to come here today because of the fact that, small businesses are going through it. It's not easy in this day and age to be an entrepreneur, to own a small business, and to manage employees. So I wanted to hear from you, just thinking about some of the legal mistakes that you have seen small businesses make. What are, I would say, the top 3 issues that you're finding?
Well, I think if you're talking about hiring in particular, I would say don't rush. Take your time. When you're doing your hiring, you want to make sure you're finding the right cultural fit as well. So that means go old school. Do your interviews, if not in person, make sure you're Zooming. Take that extra time. The other thing is I really am a firm believer in taking a deep dive into candidates' skill sets. Really figure out what their knowledge base is. One of the problems that I see coming up a lot with small employers in particular is, you hire someone and the cost of onboarding is so much. And then they have to go, background of that is you want to try and terminate somebody. Where was the disconnect? Why such a quick turnaround? And I think it has to do with not taking the deep dive into skill sets. Because the reality is with AI, anybody can make a good resume.
That's true.
Right? Anybody can concoct a good resume. Anyone can beef something up and really make it look stylized and polished. So ask those know-how questions. We want to know, if you have to complete X tasks, what would you do? If you have to complete, if Y happens, then what would you do? If Y occurs, what would you do to triage that? What would you do in response? Be specific. What are the 3 components of problem B? If problem B occurs, what are the first 3 things they should do?
Right.
Find out if an employee can answer the specific questions, because I think if small employers do that and they really take a lot of time in these interviews, they can save so much money on the back end. And in the end, it's not just, it's about, you want to be cost efficient, but you also want to think about risk prevention. Because if you're not finding that right cultural fit for the right person, you're finding somebody who can't really do the job, who's been embellishing their skills. And that's not to say we shouldn't give people an opportunity, but how much training are you prepared to do? How much time do you have? What's realistic? So I think when employers approach it looking at both taking their time, asking those knowledge-based questions, and then in terms of background checks, that's the other big area that I think small employers, it's not just as simple as run the background check through whatever the system was.
You're so right.
You want to go online and you want to check that social media.
Mm-hmm.
Let's find out. Let's do a deep dive. Let's find out, what is that employee saying about their previous employer, their previous coworkers? Mm-hmm. How are they presenting themselves and representing themselves, both as an individual or maybe in their different clubs, activities, social interactions?
Right.
Are they, again, and this goes back really to being that first part about the right cultural fit. Mm-hmm. These things take time. Small business employers don't have a whole lot of time. So you have to prioritize. Where do you want to put the time in? But if you approach these types of hiring practices, I think that it could really help in the long term to produce more efficiency. It will help with your retention, and it'll help with your risk loss prevention.
Right. I couldn't agree with you more. When I think about it, a lot of times when I talk to people about human resources, they think, oh, it's nice to have. But based off of what you're saying, it's necessary because, as you said, a lot of owners don't have the time for it. And I'm like, that's what you need HR for. We're going to make the time to make sure that happens for you, because it's real when it comes to the background checks needing to be done, both personal and professional. I'm running into people who are giving their information, and sometimes you're not able to verify it, and it's questionable, the references that they have given and et cetera. But they're thinking for the most part that they know employers aren't checking it. So they're like, yeah, I just put in the application and kept on moving. And so you are so right about that. Let me ask you this, because one of the things that I talk to my clients about is hiring the right person in the right job at the right time. And that, I think, ties directly into what you were just saying. But they also sometimes say, I hear people saying, well, I'm an employer at will. I'm an employment at will state. I can, sure, I may make the wrong hire, but I'll just go ahead and fire them and it'll be okay. And it's not always necessarily okay. So when you think about people saying those things, what are your thoughts with the I'm an employer at will and I can just let someone go?
Well, what does it mean to be an employee at will? Sure, that's a correct statement. In New Jersey, it's in an at-will state. There are so many things that play into that. Mm-hmm. So we have laws that protect terminations for if you're being terminated for being a whistleblower, or if there's discrimination, harassment, or sexual harassment, all kinds of different things that come into play. So can you fire somebody because you don't like that they wear a blue shirt every day? Yes, but if you fire the person because you don't like that they wear a blue shirt every day, they might come back and say, well, did you really fire me because you don't like that I wear a blue shirt every day? Or is it because you don't like my religion? Because it sounds awfully arbitrary to say, I don't like that blue shirt. If you take a minute and think about it, everybody we know is protected class in some way or another, one way or another, right?
Right.
Whether it's age, whether it's religion, all kinds of categories that will come into marital status, whether it's our, genetic status, all kinds of things can be part of this. So employers really need to think about, again, it goes back to making good hiring decisions. And then when you think about employment at will, if you want to terminate someone, what's the real reason why? Usually it's performance-based or it's simply business efficiency. We can't, we can no longer afford the person. So that's called, that's a legitimate business reason if it's, if it's cost. If I had to justify it, do I have the documentation that would back it up? And documentation both in terms of I can't afford this person anymore. This is no longer the way I want to spend my money. It's not efficient. And then documentation for performance. Biggest thing that employers need to do. Two biggest things employers need to do. They need to train their employees so employees know what's expected. And they need to document. And performance evaluations are uncomfortable.
Right.
No one wants to do that. People say, oh, well, if I have a scale of 1 to 5, I have to show my employees are 4s and 5s. Otherwise, they'll be offended and they won't want to work for me. Well, no. A 3 is not a C.
Exactly.
A 3 is usually meets expectations.
Yep.
Right? And that's what everybody is. That's what we're hoping for 3s. 4 is the outlier.
Right.
And 5 is if they're doing their job and somebody else's. And if you have more than 1 or 2 5s on a sheet of 10 options, it's too many. It's just too many. And nobody's all 3s because everybody needs a 2 for improvement. I mean, maybe they are all 3s, but it's rare.
Right.
That's rare. We have to be comfortable with that. And then we also have to give examples.
Excellent.
So when you say somebody is at will and you just want to make that fire, you just want to make sure that it's not arbitrary. And so if you go back and look at those performance evaluations, are they being done annually? Do they provide examples? Is it a scenario where you say, oh, this person's just the pits and they can't do anything right?
Right.
But boy, I'm a nice person and I just have to, I look at that performance review and it's all 4s. And you're just, why? Or then you start doing a performance evaluation and you decide, I'm done with this person. So they go from all 4s and 5s to all 2s in 1 year. What happened? They've been doing the job for 4 years and suddenly they can't tie their shoes.
Exactly.
That also shows maybe something changed. And then, in that year, did she have a baby? What happened? So she's, now she's 9 to 5 and before she was willing to stay late. So what's the difference? You have to be very careful on, yes, it's an at-will state, but all of these things whittle away at it.
Exactly. And I'm glad you even elaborated on that because one of the things that I find having mediated cases with the EEOC in Philadelphia and just I find that employers will oftentimes go, well, my employees know how they're doing. No, I haven't done the performance review. And I'm like, you need the documentation, something to say that you releasing that employee made sense, that, like you said, was it performance based? But a lot of times I have leaders who go, or small businesses who go, they know how they're doing. I told them they were doing a good job. I tell them when they're doing a bad job. And that's it. They find no need for the other documentation. And so I couldn't agree with you more. Training is key. A lot of times I find there's no documentation because they don't really want to have any more an in-depth conversation about, they've done great at certain things, but what haven't the employee done not so great at? And let's talk about it. And so a lot of times I find, they go, I just want everybody to be happy. And at the same time, they just want to be loved and liked by their employees. But I tell them, I compare being an employee much like being a parent, where if my children like me all the time, I am doing something wrong.
There you go. That's right. That's right.
I have a responsibility to let them know where they need to improve. What do they need to improve upon?
But then the other piece of that too, of what you're saying, of where do we need to improve on is, does the employee have a clear guideline of what they should be doing? What do those, for small businesses in particular, what do the job descriptions look like? Do you have written job descriptions? So important to have. Yes, they might take time, but to develop. But that's also where HR for Your Small Biz comes in. There are people who do this, who can, Krishna can help. You do this for a living. Right. You can help employers do this, in an economical way, because in this short, for the expenditure on the front end, what it does on the back end.
Exactly.
Those job descriptions tell employees what's expected, and they're helpful in so many ways. If an employee needs to request a reasonable workplace accommodation, which maybe we'll get to later, but if there's a disability or something what are the essential functions of the job? Those essential functions are going to be in the job description. That's where we want to look. That's what gives the employee notice. That's what gives the employee notice that this job cannot be remote.
Right.
That you were hired to work in the office 4 days a week. And now that, X injury or ailment or whatever may have occurred, just because you were able to work from home during COVID does not mean that you can work from home 4 years later.
Yeah.
That's no longer an essential function of your job, is you must be in the office.
Yep.
And so all of those things are set forth in a job description, and you can control so much more about the work environment and your expectations. And it's fair.
Yeah.
Right? Because we also, as employers and helping employers, we want them to be fair.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
And, to be fair to an employee, let them know. So.
Exactly. Now, speaking of fair, let's talk about misclassifications.
Okay.
Because a lot of times, I'll find either one or two things happening. That a small business owner will decide to make everyone contractors, or they'll say, I'm going to make everyone employees and not worry about, sometimes they say, oh, for tax purposes and this reason and that reason. But let's talk about misclassifications. What are you seeing when we think about employees and contractors? What are the missteps? And, how much can it cost the business for when they misclassify their employees?
Well, let's just start off with the question of how much can it cost? And I'm going to say big money. Big money, big money, big money, big penalties. And there's only so much on the back end if you get audited that can be done.
Right.
Because in the end of the day, I can go through and, first of all, if you get audited, just say, call counsel.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
First thing you do is if you get audited, don't go it alone, because big money is at stake.
Yep.
And so what we can do is figure out who's an employee, who's an independent contractor. And those are some pretty clear tests that I'm going to talk about. It's called, New Jersey has something called an ABC test, 3-part test, federal under Fair Labor Standards Act. Pennsylvania follows a 6-part economic realities test. So yes, there are different tests for federal and state government, and there are even different tests for different laws. New Jersey law against discrimination has a particular test. Conscientious Employee Protection Act, Wage and Hour Act have different tests, different standards. So a lot of different things out there to be looking at. But you want to have counsel come in and help you figure out as a baseline what arguments can be made to have as many people as possible be classified the way you already have them done.
Right.
Because you're talking about employer accounts coming in and getting those back taxes. You might have overtime issues, and that's the bigger money piece. That's time and a half for every minute over 40 hours a week. So that can be a huge sum. And then there are penalties. The state will work with you a little bit on penalties, not a whole lot. People will say, oh, I got audited 15 years ago and, they took off 75% of my penalties. No more. The days of that are long, long gone. We can help. The state will work with us on penalties when you have a good argument and good faith and you're ready to make an appeal. But at the process itself, this is not one to go it alone, because the laws have become so much more stringent. And in part, it's because it's so easy to misclassify, because we have, as I said, ABC tests, which I'll talk about in a minute, economic realities test, 2 different tests. So one employee doing the same job in Pennsylvania versus New Jersey can be classified differently.
Yep.
Same employee, same job can be classified differently under wage and hour law versus the law against discrimination. And it matters how you're classified because employees are entitled to workplace protections like unemployment benefits, retirement benefits, and protection from law against discrimination. All of those things that independent contractors are not necessarily entitled to. So sometimes if you have discrimination in the workplace and you have an employee or allegations of discrimination, you have a worker who's an independent contractor and they want to bring a claim, they often will couple that claim with a claim of being an employee so that they can fall under our discrimination laws. So understanding what your universe of how your workers need to be classified has lots of implications and tentacles. Yeah. Does it get too into the weeds, Krishna, to go into what those ABC tests are in economic realities?
No, it doesn't, because it's the reality of what can happen. I'm finding, out for HR for Your Small Biz, anytime we engage with a client, we automatically do what we call an internal HR audit.
Okay.
for that very reason, because I'm like, hey, we may need an attorney pretty soon, aka we need to call Susan, because you've been misclassifying your employees and your staff, and you have folks who are labeled employees and they're contractors. And I recall a time when I was actually doing the workshop and sharing this with entrepreneurs at a conference. And one person raised their hand and said, I don't agree. I've been doing this for years. I've never had this problem. And I was like, well, it is the reality. And fortunately, someone else raised their hand and said, Krishna knows what she's talking about. It just happened to a dear friend of mine. She misclassified her employees, and it wasn't by mistake. She just decided to make her staff, I'll say, I won't call them employees. She labeled them as employees. She labeled them as contractors, and they should have been employees. So they realized that during, and I think she went through a payroll type of audit, and then one agency notified another government agency, and before she knew it, she woke up one morning and she said this entrepreneur, this small business owner, just saw like $60,000 missing out of their account. Come to find out, workers' comp hit them.
That's the workers' comp. Yeah, I knew you were going there.
Hold up. You were supposed to be paying for them all along. They should have been covered at any time. They could come back to us. And now that we know that they're now going to be reclassified, I guess, as employees versus contractors, you owe us money. And it was all these fines. And she was like, now my friend is panicking for dear life because she doesn't know she'll be able to stay in business, because they told her not only was workers' comp notified, but then they were notifying another. So it was like all the agencies started paying attention to her business, and it was scary.
Well, we always want to find out too what that business is, because I had a client that was just would have been devastated, saying what you're saying. And one of the things they did was makeup and hairstyles for special events. And so all of her workers are independent contractors because they'll work for other people as well. You hire them, and then they're at different levels, but you might need to hire 10 people if it's a huge wedding or something like that. But the state, this was in Pennsylvania, were trying to say that it was just like salon workers. And I was like, no. You have to look at what was her level of control. It was very minimal. She was doing the bookings and the date of the wedding, but then the individuals would figure out, okay, how are we going to schedule? We'll meet with the individual clients, with the different bridesmaids. What kind of look are they looking for? Prices were different based on each of their, of her workers' experience and things. So there was a different level of control. They could set their own prices. They did their own marketing. They had their own, independent advertising. Some of them had separate, separate businesses, but they were all operating for this purpose. They would operate under her business name umbrella. But the state would have completely put her out of business. But we were able to, not just working with the auditor who was assigned, who was just ready to slam them right and left. But, we had to go back for 6 years and pull documents.
Wow.
But you went back 6 years. We worked with them. We worked through, we didn't end up needing to go through the appeals process, fortunately, because we ended up calling our auditor's supervisor, who happened to be out in Pittsburgh for this Philadelphia area client.
Okay.
But it's a matter of taking that extra step and showing. You have to be able to go through each of these steps and looking at control. Who's doing the marketing? Who can the person, are they economically motivated for their own gain, not just for that of the business, right? Is there incentives for themselves? Are they using their own tools of the trade?
Right.
Are they making that investment that's not just benefiting the company, but that could be benefiting their own individual? And when you start looking at those factors, able to establish, yes, these weren't salon workers, right? These are true independent contractors who shouldn't be employees. So I think that, I'm a firm believer at call counsel, be able to work through. And then when you have to, when you be able to not be afraid to challenge. Because I also think that state administrations, they'll work with you.
Right.
They will work with you when you've got reasoned arguments to make. There's some good examples of truck drivers sometimes. Lots of independent contractors out there. But what if they're a delivery driver? Do they own their own truck or is it the company truck?
Right.
Who's planning the route? Right? Who sets the schedule? Whose name is on the truck? All of these things go into who has the level of control over that process. Is this the business that the worker is generally, are they always engaged in the same business? Is it just delivery service that's the business, or is this something a little bit tangential to it? Right? Are they making deliveries for a warehouse, or is this something that is kind of like a one-off and they just hire somebody here and there to deliver? So we always want to look at those types of questions to help with that classification system.
Now, what about for those employers who decide, or those entrepreneurs who want to treat everybody the same, and they go, I've been giving my contractor performance reviews and rating them, and I've been treating them just like I do the rest of my staff. I've seen some give the contractors an employee handbook. And I'm like, no, they're not an employee. Please don't give them the employee handbook. What are some other oops or things that concern you where they could be potentially treating a contractor like they're an employee, where they can later on say, no, I was an employee technically, and I should now be entitled to unemployment insurance and all those different things?
Well, I think the biggest thing is scheduling control, right? When you start giving them vacation time, sick time, those kinds of things.
Okay.
I think it's, I don't like to see a performance evaluation for obviously they're not an employee, but you can evaluate performance as part of the term of a contract.
Okay.
The contract does not, the contract helps to say how someone is classified,
right?
But it's really the day-to-day.
Okay.
It's those circumstances that control. I like to see a contract in place, but in the end of the day, there could be a contract that everybody is signed, because people want to be independent contractors.
Right.
A lot of people want to be independent contractors. They don't want to hear that they're an employee. There's benefits to them for that, for tax purposes. So there can be a lot of pushback, but at the same time, that contract really can just be, under the economic realities test, it can be one factor. But even in New Jersey, it's really not a factor at all. But I'm more concerned about the giving of the vacation, the sick time, and that kind of record keeping, control over the schedule. Come at this time, end at this time, what you're doing. Are they doing the break times in between? And then is the worker doing something that's unique, that's not part of what the actual business is, right? I mean, if the business is, if the business is a farm and growing tomatoes, picking tomatoes, that's what they're engaged in, right? But if you're an accountant doing non-payroll work for that business, if it's non-payroll work, well, that's something a little bit different,
okay,
right? That's not the business they're generally engaged in. That accountant is an independent contractor. Because it's not as germane. It's non-payroll work. If it was payroll, that'd be part of the business, right? So that's a difference. That would be a difference there. So kind of some things to look at.
Okay, excellent. Now let's talk about, remote work, because a lot of businesses are hiring remote workers or out-of-state workers. What are some of the landmines that are there that, they may not even realize they're stepping into?
I think the biggest one is tax consequences. And I'm going to say, for the tax consequences, you want to talk to an accountant about that. But there are significant tax consequences that employers should be aware of. I think the second biggest issue is the New Jersey Division of Civil Rights and Attorney General just this past year have issued guidance that says the New Jersey law against discrimination does not just apply to New Jersey residents.
Right.
It applies to anyone who, you don't even have to step foot. You could be in Wyoming. You can live in Wyoming. You've never stepped foot in New Jersey. But if you are working remotely for a New Jersey employer, you're subject to the New Jersey law against discrimination. Why does this matter? Because we have one of the best laws against discrimination in the country, right? Our law is fantastic.
Right.
Well, I should say it's fantastic, but it's employee friendly.
Right.
Right. So for employers, you need to know that all of these workers are covered. So that's it. Those remote workers, that's huge. And I think the other thing that's really significant for remote work is, do you have clear descriptions as to what has to be done? Are you monitoring those remote workers? Are there policies in place? What does the handbook say about remote workers? What about the workers who are in the office? And are those workers doing, in some cases, the same job as people who are working remotely? Well, then what happens if those workers in the office decide they want to work remotely?
Right.
Are they allowed to? What's the rationale if they're not? What does the job description say? Why do they have to be in the office? You want to have policies in place ahead of time that address all of these things. But, I think that the law against discrimination is a big one with its long tentacles. I'm always concerned about the tax consequences of that. And then I think it's also important that there's a certain sense of camaraderie and belonging, that businesses can thrive if we feel like a team.
Yep.
And people don't feel so disconnected and disjointed. I think we saw a lot of that, and we learned a lot during COVID. So for employers who are looking and thinking about remote options, remember, they're still part of your team.
Right.
So you got to bring them in.
Exactly.
Come back to the online happy hour. Come back to the, to those activities where there's, where there really is, be a Zoom or Teams, or there is that face-to-face, because that's so important. People were willing to go that extra mile to do that extra something when you're for the team.
Yep.
And there's a lot of benefit that might not initially be easy to measure, but that will manifest long term.
Okay. Thank you. I hope you all are seeing and understanding why having human resources, why having legal on your side really does benefit your business. We are not just, a lot of times employers assume and individuals assume that it's just another cost, another expense. We are not an expense. We are actually a cost savings to your business, because we know all the things that could potentially go wrong. And unfortunately, we do live in a litigious society. So speaking of that, let's talk about harassment and discrimination. When we look at internal complaints, if an employee alleges harassment, discrimination, or unfair pay, what's the immediate legal next step a business should take?
The first thing you want to do is you want to define the scope. What's the scope of the issue? So scope can be a few things, right? We want to know the who, what, when, where, when and where. Mm-hmm. So who are the witnesses? What happened? Who are the witnesses? When did this occur? So we want to get that universe clearly defined. And once we kind of have a sense of that scope, what are the issues, right? And we want to identify just early some of the legal issues to spot. And then I want to secure the data. Right. Even before I'm calling anybody and doing anything else, IT becomes very important. I want to get to that IT. I want to secure the data. I want to freeze. I want to get the video cameras, whatever there may be. I want any document retention or, destruction programs stopped. I don't want employees being able to delete anything. Right? Nobody else needs to know that, just IT, but I like to get a freeze in place. And then I like to make sure that the reporter, right, whether the reporter is the alleged victim, whatever it may be, I want to make sure that person is safe. And I want to say, it sounds kind of counterintuitive to say that's step 2. I'm hoping that doesn't need to be step 1, but you really need to understand a little bit of the universe of what's happening first, so that we know who needs to be protected and what level of protection needs to be taking place, if any, right? So I think it's okay, again, to not rush. Right? Don't rush. Make sure you have a full understanding. So it's okay. It's okay. We hear you say from a legal perspective that can be step 2, because you need to know what your universe is that you're dealing with. Right. And then let's make sure the person's protected. The reporter, the complaint, the victim, whatever it may be. And protection might mean maybe the accused is put out on leave. Mm-hmm. Maybe the alleged victim might be asking for leave. We maybe need to think about changing a reporting structure. You never want to move the victim.
Right.
Never move the victims. They don't go to another floor. They don't get demoted.
Say that one more time, because I can't tell you how many times I have had a leader say, I'm just going to move that person. Can you say it one more time? What they should not do and why they should not do that.
You never want to move the victim. And people say, oh, well, I'm not going to change their job responsibilities. I'm putting them out, or I'm going to put them out on leave. She doesn't really want to go, but it's okay. It'll be a paid leave. So she gets a paid vacation. Just to be clear, a victim generally does not want a paid vacation. Mm-hmm. They want to be in an environment that is free of harassment, discrimination. So what happens when you do that is, even though it might be coming from a really good place in your, from your heart and mind, genuinely, mm-hmm. you're creating what's called an adverse employment consequence. And an adverse employment consequence is just, what can be, it doesn't have to be financial. It could be a change in status.
Right.
Well, if I'm not sitting on this spot in this particular area, I don't have access to all this information flow. Everybody sees me as the gatekeeper. I am the gatekeeper. But if I moved here, I lose this status. Everybody knows that the person in this position doing X is always the next one to be promoted. Mm-hmm. So even if I'm being paid the same, but I have to sit over here.
Mm-hmm. Makes a difference.
It's a difference. Or if you take me out of the game,
mm-hmm.
I can't get back in. I'm no longer the person in the know. And that's what I bring to the table is I'm the person in the know. Right? So you bench me. Mm-hmm. It's an adverse employment consequence. And sometimes what happens for employers, and I'll go back to your question about investigation in a minute, but is an investigation can result in a determination that a person was not discriminated against or harassed. However, it can also show that the person was retaliated against because the actions that were taken in the course of a wrongful investigation under the guise of protecting, mm-hmm. right, can be retaliation. And that's what can create the legal liability and hence the damages and the financial problems. So, keep that piece in mind. So we said we're going to define the scope and all that entailed. We're securing the data. We're protecting the reporter, the complainant. And then the next thing we want to do is think about who's going to conduct an investigation. Mm-hmm. Internal HR professional, often very capable of doing this.
Right.
But sometimes the way to go is external.
Yeah.
You do not always need an attorney to do an investigation. Sometimes, but HR for Your Small Biz. This is something that I know you offer and that you can do. Why do you want to go outside? Because you want to find that third party neutral, mm-hmm. right? And you HR people generally very nice and want to say get along with everybody. But your HR person, everybody's business because that is your job to know, and it's your job to know their personality, mm-hmm. and it's your job to know that Jane is very sweet, but she's annoying, mm-hmm. and whatever it may be, but yet she is. And Bob is a little too friendly and he's fine, but he just hugs a little too long.
Yep.
And so you go into an investigation knowing that's going to be reflected. So that's not good.
Exactly.
Right. So look externally for companies like yours who will come in and can do that as a neutral and not bring with it the baggage. When do you need a lawyer? I think you need a lawyer when, I think if you find somebody who's qualified HR professional who's doing investigations, if they tell you need a lawyer, you need a lawyer. Yeah. If you think that there's real opportunity here for legal liability, how high up the chain does this go? Right? Who is implicated? At what levels does it impact people who are producers? Is it likely that where there's a complaint, there's smoke, there's fire? Is this a repeat offender? Mm-hmm. Is this someone who perhaps in the past there's been efforts to protect? If the remedy is some civility training, some interpersonal skill training, harassment training, that's one thing. If the remedy is we're going to have to probably have, terminations, that might be HR. That might be something for to bring in legal counsel. Yeah. I do a lot of Equal Pay Act investigations. So that Equal Pay Act is making sure, not just the federal Equal Pay Act is making sure by gender, right? That's male, female, and I don't know right now. It's kind of up in the air, I guess, whether it be non-binary. And I seriously doubt at this particular time. I think we're going to gender, probably in federal, and it will stay that way. But in New Jersey, it would certainly be New Jersey Equal Pay Act is called the Diane B. Allen Equal Pay Act. And the Allen Act is far broader than the federal. And that's not just gender discrimination and pay equity. Right? That's everything that's covered under our law against discrimination. That's race, religion. That's going to be not just male, female gender. That's going to include, all gender, cisgender, non-binary, transgender. It's going to take the look at all of these other protected characteristics. And so when we do those types of investigations, that's a little bit of a different animal in terms of the type of data to require, and how to evaluate, I guess, pay equity. So that's a scenario where you're looking at what jobs are similarly situated, and I think that if you're in the need of that type of investigation, that's really a place where I would seek legal counsel.
Excellent. As you can see, now you see why I love Susan so much. I hope you're learning as much as I am, because when I tell you the knowledge and the information that you get just from one session and sit in with Susan, you can't beat it. So Susan, remind them again what states that you cover, and let's do a quick, because I love your law firm. I love you. Let's give a shout out to your law firm. How can they reach you if they go, you know what, I need to learn more? Is it okay if they're not necessarily in New Jersey and just want to get your advice, or how does it work?
Oh, absolutely. So if first of all, feel free to, reach out. My contact information at Hill Wallach will be as part of this. So by all means, reach out. Always happy to have a conversation. And no, it doesn't just have to be, I'm barred in New York and New Jersey. I practice an awful lot in Pennsylvania. I'm not barred in Pennsylvania. But certainly, I do an awful lot of work, PA, Delaware, Maryland. I will generally be able to assist and provide some information. But where I can't, as I said, my firm is in, California, very specific employment law. I will find someone in California. My firm, we don't have an employment law lawyer in California now. We're doing other things out there. But, we'll find you competent, true counsel, so that if you're not in a jurisdiction where I'm comfortable with the employment laws, I'll tell you and get you to the right person.
And
I think
she does.
More important.
You did that for me
did that
more than once. I have clients in Texas. She's provided guidance to, I think we even did Florida. When I tell you, Susan is the woman who knows people and who can get you the attorneys that you need to help you with your business. She can do it if she isn't the person to do it for you. If you're as lucky as I am to get her to do it for you, trust me when I say you're blessed, because she makes sure all the bases are covered. Let's talk a little bit more, about when we look at, these recent employment law changes. And, when we think about federal or state, are there any recent or upcoming law changes that small business owners need to act on now?
The biggest one in New Jersey is pay transparency, and that's been in New Jersey July 1st, 2025. So what employers need to know is that they need, when they're posting a job for promotion, they have to have the hourly or the salary range posted.
Okay.
And they also need to provide information about benefits. So when I say range, this is something that's been in New York now for a few years.
Okay.
And range is just that, right? What's range? It doesn't really give an employer much to go on. So employers exhale. There's not a lot out there in terms of guidance. And in New York, they've said ranges of, 50 75,000 have been at for certain jobs have been okay.
Okay.
So this is an exhale moment. I mean, when I heard it first, I thought, oh, but like all things, there's going to be some guidance coming. So right now, do your posting, keep your range as broad as you need to have it, as long as it's something reasonable. Because we know if you could get a candidate, with a high school diploma, or you have a candidate with a master's degree, that's a big range probably in what they're going to be able to perform for you. So, you can just tie it to educational requirements or job experience, all of those things. But make sure that you are doing those postings and that people internally have noticed that there is a posting, right? That there is a promotion opportunity. This, you don't want to be in the situation, I think, that's happened historically where people are being, some employers will reclassify instead of promoting, but you don't want to get into that habit. You want to be posting, let everyone know that there's opportunity for promotion and what those ranges look like. So that's the biggest thing right now in New Jersey. Certainly, we want to always be looking at our use of AI.
Okay.
In terms of like what's on the horizon, a lot of employers are looking to streamline, and they're both in their hiring processes and using algorithms to try and improve those hiring processes. And there's some great tools out there, but I would just encourage employers to be very cautious, because when you're looking at, there's such a thing as algorithm bias. And we want to be very careful, because it's like anything else, garbage in, garbage out. What data is being used to create that algorithm? You need to know as an employer, because if you don't know what goes in and you're using an algorithm that's based on all white males over 50, well, guess who's not going to get a fair shot at that job?
Exactly.
Amazon had this with a warehouse position.
They sure did.
That they had, they ended up using an algorithm that was all males. I'm sorry, I'm looking off to the side as I tried it. It was all males. And they had to scrap the whole thing.
Exactly.
And you're like, that's Amazon. I didn't know it was in their algorithm. So make sure if you're using a service or developing something, think about, who's being considered, who isn't. If you're using AI for the interview process, make sure you're letting your interviewee, your candidate, know that this is AI.
Okay.
We want to be fair. And why? Because you want to make sure you're accommodating people with disabilities ultimately.
Wow.
Right? Because you don't know if AI is doing the interview, do they know that this person may have some type of an impairment that's protected in the interview process, and AI is not accounting for that. Exactly. And if you don't tell the person that it's AI, they don't have a chance to ask. Right? Maybe AI is watching how their eyes are moving or their body functions or something like that. And if a person has a disability or a twitch or their eyes aren't tracking or whatever it may be, is that fair?
Exactly.
That's discrimination in the hiring practice. So there's lots of little pitfalls that can come up in here. So I think, in terms of what's on the horizon, let's be really careful and mindful about those things.
Wow. So I have run out of time, but if you have enjoyed this segment, our employment law segment with Susan, as much as I have, chime in below. Let me know your thoughts. Let me know if you want us to do another segment. Susan, I'm going to say we are definitely going to do another one, because this has been awesome. And then I still have quite a few questions I did not ask you yet that I think would benefit all my small business owners. And so if you would grace us with your presence again, that would be absolutely wonderful. I hope you can squeeze us into your schedule.
This has been fantastic, and I appreciate the opportunity so much, Krishna. And I really hope that we're able to chat again. I will look forward to it.
Well, thank you so very much for coming. And again, everyone, if you need HR support, reach out to the HR for Your Small Biz team. Again, HR, the number 4, Your Small Biz. Hope to talk to you soon. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.